What's up, guys? I'm here in the bike shop. Haven't made a bike shop video for quite a while, or any video for that matter. I'm kind of silent these last couple of months. So it's time to make a video here, and I thought I would do a quick tutorial on an old bike here. I'm working on resurrecting this old Mongoose, and before you're like, why would you work on a Mongoose? Well, because they weren't actually always bad bikes. This one was made in Taiwan. It's got quality components on it for its time, and it's not a bad bike, so it's worth fixing up. Somebody will get some smiles out of it again. So the problem is, everything's good to go on this bike. Everything's been recabled. The shifters are working properly again. They get gummed up after sitting for so many years. But they're good to go. The brakes should be good to go. All of the drivetrain components, the wheels are greased and all that good stuff. But when I went to reinstall this rear wheel here, I noticed that it had a pretty significant wobble in it, which is a problem, as you're probably very well aware. This wheel will need to be fixed. But that's a pretty bad wobble too. Like, if it's visually obvious the way that it is like that, like, you can totally see that, even without the brakes being anywhere near it for a point of reference. So we'll have to throw this over up on the truing stand. Every home bike mechanic ought to have their own truing stand. It's an invaluable tool. Okay. Making sure that's good to go there. So now we can bring these guys in here until it touches and you can see what side. Okay, so it started to make contact right there where the bend is in the rim. So before I even really start, it's not necessarily something you can just fix with a spoke wrench and tightening and loosening spokes. And one way that you can tell is to find the spot that's out and check the spokes. And as you can see here, the spokes that are on the side that it's being pulled are loose, and spokes on the opposite side are tight as a drum. Super tight. I can hardly move those. So what that basically means is that this rim is bent, and no amount of tightening and loosening spokes is going to correct that. This will have to be delaced, and the only way to straighten out a rim is to basically take it apart and try to fix it with a press. Now, I don't know if that's actually going to work. We may have to just outright replace this thing. Guess one of the other things I don't like about it too is the seam right here on this rim seems like it's starting to come apart a little bit. So we might just opt to replace it. So first, I'm not even going to try to true it because I already know the rim is bent, and it's just going to break spokes if you try to tighten the ones that need to pull it the correct way, and it'll just never really be right again, and it'll just cause problems down the road. So we won't need the truing stand anymore for just a little while. So pull the tire off first. And then after that, pull that rim strip out. Probably be able to reuse that. Next, take the skewer out. Try not to keep your parts from getting lost by reassembling things as you get into them. Next, we take the cassette off of here, and there's a couple of ways to do that. I like to use an impact wrench. You can also use a chain whip and just a socket wrench if you don't have any air tools or impact tools at your disposal. And I gotta go turn my air compressor on. Okay. So there's a couple of special tools you need to take off these cassettes. You might need a chain whip, which is just a tool to hold the cassette using a chain. You can just use an old chain and make your own tool whip if you want. They're not that hard. But you also need a cassette removal tool. There's two different kinds. I like to use this kind that's got that little center guide. It's for quick release through axles, so it just fits in there like that into those splines. There's just a little locking cap on there that holds all of those gears in there. And you can use both. I like this one the best because it's got a 1/2-inch driver in it too, so it makes it possible to use the impact tool. And so basically all I'm doing, obviously it's in reverse, this is just normal threads, is I'm just going to hit really quick, and that's usually all it takes. So lock ring is out, and then all the other gears just slide right off like so. So now that you've got the cassette off, the wheel is ready to disassemble. And to do that, you need another tool, a spoke wrench. This one is from Park Tool. I really like Park Tool's design. It just fits in the wheel better than some of the other ones out there on the market. And so now that we've got everything taken off, the rim strips out, and we don't have anything in the way of the hub right there, we can start taking spokes out. There's not really a method, although it's wise to kind of like work around the wheel and, you know, not just take it off like one after another, kind of like skip spokes going around so that it keeps some tension on the wheel that's even. You don't want to have like half the spokes pulling the wheel. You might cause it to bend even further than it is already. So anyway, I like to start at the valve stem too, just so I know where I'm at. And what I'll do is I'll just go through here and loosen each one of these. Yikes. Some of these are really tight. Might not be able to get away with it. But if they're too tight and they don't want to spin, just come back to them later, because once they have some tension taken off of them, they'll spin. Like all of the ones on the drive side right now are super tight. But we'll come back to those. And one thing I like to do if you're going to skip is I'll just take like this set, skip the next set, and then go to this set right here. God, those are really tight, so I want to keep tension on that one right there, and we'll just keep working our way around until all of the spoke nipples are loose. I'm not taking the spoke nipples out at this point. I'm just getting them to where I can move them by hand. So that one was super tight. So we'll skip, go to this next set here. That one's really loose. Yeah, this might not work. Like, my tool's not really that worn out, but it's like spinning on some of these because they're so tight. So once again, skip a set. Try this one here. Hopefully eventually I'll be able to get all of these out. But just keep working around the wheel until all of the spoke nipples are loose. And once you get about half of them loose, you don't need to skip spokes anymore. Because ideally I want to reuse these spokes, so I don't want to have to cut them out. Although if you have brand new spokes, by all means, you know, cut the old ones and just put new ones in. But I try to reuse the old ones if they're still good. In this case they are. There's no damaged ones or anything like that. Yeah, all of those drive side spokes are insanely tight. So either somebody crashed this bike or ran it over with something, or maybe jumped it and came down really hard. It's kind of hard to say, but a lot of pressure was put on it, and it basically attempted to taco. The wheel tried to taco, but the spokes were strong and tight enough that it only let it go about 1/8 of an inch out, which is enough to mess with the brakes and make it a not very fun bike to ride. So at this point I'm skipping just a few, but I'm going to stop skipping the spokes now because I can feel the tension coming off. And once we're at that point, we don't really have to worry about certain spokes being on there too tight. And there I'm revisiting some of the ones I couldn't loosen before, and now they're spinning, no problem. They just needed a little bit of tension removed from them first. That was one of the ones that was spinning. And I just like to loosen these to the point where I can turn them by hand really easily. And at this point, all the spoke nibbles are easy to crack and loose now. So don't try to strip these things if they don't want to come out, you know what I mean? Like, if it's too tight, just leave it. Loosen the other ones around it and the ones on the opposite side before you come back to it, and it should be fine. Okay, I think that's everything. All of these are loosey-goosey now. Okay. Another tool that you're going to need, which I can't find at the moment, is a little tiny flathead screwdriver, preferably with a soft cap. This is what I use. It's just a tiny little flathead screwdriver, but it has this soft rubber cap here, so I can kind of drive it into my palm like this and spin it, and it doesn't fatigue my hand like some other screwdrivers do. So now that we've got everything loose, it doesn't matter really where you start, but if I can get my camera to stay still without falling, that would be great. So now basically I'm just going to use the screwdriver, because if you look, each of these spoke nipples has a flathead pattern for a flathead screwdriver. So it's just easier to spin the spokes with the tool than trying to remove them by hand. And then once I take it out, I'll just make a little pile really close to where I'm removing them. I mean, you can take these out of here without the screwdriver, but I think it just makes it faster and easier. Especially once you've done this a bunch of times and you kind of get a feel for it. You don't always have to like look at everything to see exactly what you're doing. You can just kind of figure it out by feel. Because, you know, there's probably 100 different ways to take a wheel apart, but I try to do it this way because it's just faster and it preserves the spokes and the spoke nipples. So there's like a, I guess, an urban legend out there that you should never reuse bicycle spokes. That it creates a hazard, that they're going to break. Well, the bicycle spokes only break if they're overstressed or badly corroded or oxidized or stretched. Like the old ones from like the old Schwinn bicycles from the 50s and 60s and 70s, like they stretch, like they're tapered in the middle because they've just been sitting so long. And also the steel that they used for spokes back then was not as hard as the material they use today. Like the spokes of today are like much higher tensile strength than the old ones. So I mean, use your better judgment. I don't keep old spokes like from those era bikes. Like if I build a Schwinn up and I want to keep the rim and I want to keep the wheels, I will typically buy new spokes for that, just because it really makes the wheel look better. And you know, with spokes being that old, you probably shouldn't reuse. But if they're only like 10 or 20 years old and they're like alloy, then you're probably fine. Like these ones are most likely stainless steel. Some of them are made out of aluminum alloy. Some of them are even made out of titanium, like my road bike. But those are expensive spokes. You can't just replace those. They're expensive. These are just regular J spokes. Most common kind for most bicycle wheels. So once you get like halfway through this here, you can just kind of like pop all the spokes out like that and then just use your hands to remove the rest of the spokes because it's easy. So the way I like to do this is after I get all of these out, and you notice I haven't actually removed any spokes from the hub yet. That's because it's faster to do it this way. And some might say you don't even need to remove them from the hub. Like theoretically, you could just leave this the way that it is and just lace it back up, but that's really hard. You're going to confuse yourself. So it's worthwhile to just go ahead and take all the spokes out. And I just kind of turn this thing upside down and then start dropping spokes out. And that way it gets laced up the way I like to do it too. So there's, you know, half a dozen different ways to properly lace up a wheel and it still comes out the same. And you know, as you build more wheels, you'll kind of develop your own technique. You don't necessarily have to do the same way I do. Some people are just, you know, they orient a different way. Notice there's one spoke that's not going to quite fall out, and that's the one with the reflector in it. And I leave that one for last because you have to kind of just pull it off. And if you do that with a bunch of other spokes hanging off this, there's a good chance you're going to stab yourself in the hand or something like that, and that's not good. So now we've got our hub taken out. our pile of spokes here. So I'll just kind of gather these up and bundle them together for now. Try not to mix them up with my other spokes here. So after you build a lot of wheels and take a lot of wheels apart, you just sort of end up with a lot of different spokes. But that's how you build custom wheels. You know, you got to have spokes of like every different size. So these are all good. I will be able to reuse these spokes. They're not damaged. Like, things I would look for to not reuse them again would be to like check here at this spot where there is the 90-degree bend, or the 80-degree bend, or whatever it is. Right here, a lot of times the spoke will have damage right here if it's over tightened, or the hub has been damaged by the chain coming off and grinding against the spokes or something like that. But these all look good, so they're totally fine to use again. The spoke nipples, there's a few here that I might not end up using because they were a little bit rounded off just from being over tightened. So, but I've got plenty of spoke nipples too, so I'm not too worried about that. Now, as for the rim, now we can kind of test the rim and see what kind of bad shape is it. You can kind of look at it this way and see where the bend is. It's kind of like right here by the seam. So basically, to check flatness, it's just this really crude method of just like put it on the floor. So you can see the rim is bent. It's out about 1/2 inch, and it seems like the bend is over by the seam too, so that's not good. You probably could fix this on a press if you really took your time and like had proper equipment, but it's just all too easy to mar the surface of the brake surface for the rim, and it's going to be really hard to get it perfectly straight again with that kind of a bend in it. It's pretty sharp. I'm willing to bet that it's probably not round anymore either perfectly. I don't really have a way to measure that other than like a tape measure. Let's check it out. Let's see if it's out of round, like noticeably. Tape measure. Okay, so typically the seam of the rim is opposite of the valve stem, so we'll just measure there really quick. We're looking at like 22.5. Now if we turn that 90 degrees, it's like 22 5/8 on this side, so it is out of round just a little bit by about 1/8 inch. So it may not look like much, and these values might not be a whole lot, but it's more than you can correct with just spokes. Like, this will have to be fixed in a press of some kind and like bent back into its original shape, which is pretty tough to do. It's not impossible, but it's not what I'm gonna do. Now that's a really common rim for 90s bikes, the Arayas. So you can kind of look through and see like what other options we've got. We have a Trek rim here, that aluminum one right there. So we're just basically looking for any used but still good 26-inch single rim that has 36. Count them, 36. You can just count the number of holes on the hub. There should be 18 per side. And in this case, you can kind of start there and just kind of count 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, and you're halfway through. 9 times 2 is 18, times 2 again is 36. So it's just a quick way to reference that. We've got lots of rims up here to pick from, but they're all different sizes and styles. And we probably want to stick with the same style. So we've got this one here. It already has a hub. That's a 32 though. I'm pretty sure. So that's the other thing. There's a lot of mountain bike wheels that are like better, nicer wheels are going to be 32 spoke. I think that. It's been a minute. Let's just count right here and see what's up. One thing you can do also is just kind of hold one of these and just kind of go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And if you get 9, well, this is a 36 spoke then. So this one is a contender. This rim right here. Of course, we'll have to take everything apart. So I'll keep that one aside in case I choose to use it. I don't see anything else up here that's really compatible. Well, there is this one here. That's basically the other wheel complement to this one. That's the front. I don't remember what bike those came from. I kind of want to keep it the same. So if I have another Aroya rim, I do have some of these, but they're different and they're a set, and I don't want to break up a set either. So what else have we got? There's, oh yeah, those ones, but no, not using those. Those are like 1985 double wall rims off of a Klein Mountain, like one of the original Klein mountain bikes. So I intend to restore that someday. So we'll check the other room, the back. This is the back room where there's just all the extra stuff everywhere, and there's a lot of it. Oh man. I always say I need to clean this room anytime I come in here. And I do, but it's like, nah, I'm good. So what do we got here? We have, this is a similar rim. It's 36. And let's see if it's good. So you can just do a quick visual and then just spin the wheel and look for any lateral movement or out of round movement. So this one would probably work, and it's an Aroya. It's the same brand of rims, so if we used this one, nobody would notice. I think that's about the best I've got right now. There's some other nice double wall rims in here, but this one is 32 spokes, so I'm not going to use that one. There's a lot more in here than I thought. But since I think I found one I'm going to use, I'm just going to go ahead and take that Aroya, and we're just going to use that. It's not exactly the same. Oh, wait, what's this? That looks like a Walmart rim. Most Walmart rims are just single wall aluminum junk, basically. The Aroyas were Japanese and they were better. They were just had a nice profile to them, and so yeah, let's just go ahead and do that. And it doesn't matter that this is a front wheel and it's going onto a back hub, because we're going to be reusing these spokes and those spoke nipples and this hub. The only thing we're changing out is the rim, so we're going to end up with an extra set of spokes and an extra front hub to put on something else later. So it's the same dealio with this one. We're going to pull the rim strip. That's probably still good too, and start pulling these out. Once again, I start over at the valve stem, and what I do is I skip every 3. I go like basically every 4 sets. So it's like I'll do this set, and then I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, loosen this set, 1, 2, 3, 4, loosen this set, and work my way around so that I'm not taking like all the pressure off just like half of it. It's not good for it. So skip, and then over here. So you don't need to skip necessarily every 4. If you just skip every other set of spokes, you can probably achieve the same results. It's just that when you skip every 4, you end up working around twice and getting to like all of the outside spokes, and then you can do all of the inside spokes after that. That's really no wrong way to do it, just don't break the rim. See, these are coming out a lot nicer than the set from the bent wheel. So we worked around once, now we're working on our second way and we're doing the alternate sets. Come on. Now that I've made it around twice, start with the outside spokes. So I guess we loosen the inside ones first. All the inside spokes that are inserted from the inside of the hubs to the outside. And now that most of the tension is taken off of the spokes, I'm just skipping every other set instead of every 4th set. And eventually these will get easy enough to where you can just spin them by hand. Not quite there yet though. Every wheel's a little bit different. And Arroyo rims are pretty good rims usually. I like to use them for cruisers. I'll often replace Schwinn wheels with Arroyo rims that I pick up from the junkyard. Let's see, these are all kind of nice and loose now. Okay, so now that everything is loose, we'll come down here and do the same thing we did before. Maybe keep a separate pile of spoke nipples, but I think they're the same. Now, spoke nipples are not always the same length. There's different lengths, and the older ones had different thread pitch on them, so they don't necessarily fit. And there's also different gauge spokes too. Most are 14 gauge. These are 14 gauge here that I'm working with now, which is kind of the standard. E-bikes are like typically anywhere from 13 to 11 gauge spokes. Almost motorcycle spokes, it depends on the wheel, but typically at least 13 or 12 gauge. So you've got to keep that into account. I've actually got a set of chrome rims in the back that will only take like a 12 gauge spoke or bigger. Just the holes they drilled for the spoke nipples are massive. They're like a 1/4 inch in diameter. I ordered them on accident, and when I went to go build them, I'm just like, what the hell? The spoke nipples just slip right through. So, it's made for an e-bike or something like that, or even a motorcycle. Although it'd be a really skinny rim for a motorcycle, maybe a moped. But definitely made to be beefy. So now, instead of buying new chrome rims, I usually just clean up the ones that are still in good shape off of old vintage bikes. A lot of that rust and stuff that accumulates on the surface can be removed with the wire brush or some fine sandpaper. I usually use like 400 or 600 grit sandpaper to remove rust from chrome. Works pretty good, because once you chrome plate metal, it's harder than steel, so you can get away with using a steel brush or pretty abrasive tools to get that off, and it works great. My good spokes and put them aside so they don't get mixed up here. So, something I started doing recently was cataloging my sparks. Before I would just bundle them up and then just kind of guess, but you actually ought to measure these. Like, I had to go through all of these spokes here and measure each bundle and each spoke and go through and label them so I know what I've got if I ever need to do that, which is, you know, anytime I'm building a wheel. There's spoke calculators out there that will tell you in millimeters how long your spokes need to be. So I'll show you how to measure these. You'll need a dial caliper that has the inside measurement right here. And what you want to do is start right here on the inside of the spoke. Instead, don't measure from the outside, measure from the inside, where the spoke would actually rest on the hub. And then just take it out and go until the other one is flush with the end, and keep it as straight as you can, and just kind of do your best to eyeball it. And I kind of like go to the nearest 10,000th of, or nearest 100th of an inch. Yeah. So this one comes up as 10.310. So in inches, how to find a calculator. Come on. There it goes. Okay, so these measured 10 inches and 310 thousandths, so 10.31. And to get the millimeters, you just multiply that number by 25.4. And we end up with 261.874. So I typically will round, obviously, to the nearest millimeter. So these are going to be 262. And that's that. So I'll just take some tape. Because when you're building wheels, you really need to be pretty precise about the spoke length. There is some play. I mean, you can get away with a couple millimeters longer or shorter than what is required, but it just makes life easier if they're the correct size. It's 262, so just write that on there. Put them in my pile over here, and eventually I'll have a way to sort out the different sizes and everything too. So anyway, that's just a side note, since we had an extra set of spokes to deal with and then an extra front hub. to go on something. I mean, it's not the best hub in the world, but it's not the worst either, so I'll keep it. Besides, the 36 holes are somewhat hard to find, actually, so. So now that we've got that done, and we've got a pile of spoke nipples here, these are the same size, so I'm not going to trip if I mix them up. In fact, I'm just going to mix them up anyway. It doesn't matter. Okay. Now for the fun part. Now we're going to lace up our new rim. Oh, I guess we should check to see how badly this one is bent or not bent. See, it's pretty straight. Like, there's a little bit of a wobble in it, but that is so small that it can be corrected with spoke tension. Like, up to maybe a 1/4 of an inch, you can correct with spoke tension. This one's only got about an 1/8 inch, so no problem. And of course, that's just a guess. I'm not like being really precise about this, but what I like to do is start on the valve stem here, and I'll insert my first spoke here, and then I'll work my way over I'll skip every 3 basically, so do every 4th spoke. So one here, 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 and then so on, and work my way around. And on the hub, it'll be every other. So let me show you how that works. If I can figure out where to put this camera. Where it is going to film what I want it to film. There we go. I think you can see me okay, hopefully. So, it doesn't matter which side you start on unless you're really concerned about the orientation of the stamped lettering in the rim. Doesn't really matter. This rim is symmetrical, meaning that no matter which way you flip it, the spoke pattern is the same. It's centered onto the rim. There's no offset. So, grab your spokes. And what I like to do is just start here. It doesn't even matter where you start. I'm just going to start somewhere. And then I basically drop a spoke in every other hole. So I start with 4. Okay. And then the first one is going to go right here by the valve stem, just to the left of the valve stem. Stick that through there. Put a spoke nipple on it. Just a few turns. It doesn't need to be tight. It shouldn't be tight. And actually, you can just go ahead and thread all of these through here at once. It just makes it a little bit faster. And even though I'm not doing it, it doesn't hurt to lubricate the spoke nipples. It just makes installation easier. So I'll do that, and then I'll drop 5 more in there. Again, skipping every other hole on the hub. Cool. So when you're done, you'll end up with something that looks like this. And so at this point here, I want to grab the hub firmly and turn it this way. So I'm moving the rim clockwise in relation to the hub, in other words. I'm not saying right or left, like turn it clockwise in relation to the hub. I mean, you can do it the other way, but you shouldn't. So once you have that, you grab a single spoke. This time it's going to go through the opposite side. and you can just start anywhere you want. And in this case it's a 3-cross pattern because that's what we had before. So we're going to cross 3 spokes and then insert the spoke through the rim. So the first one is here. You can't really see where it crosses, but it does cross there underneath the hub. And then the second spoke, and then the third spoke. And on the third cross you want to go under it. So it's an over, over, under, and into the rim. This is where it kind of helps to have the screwdriver to start things. Once you have the first one in, it's pretty much going to hold that pattern. And you can start running other spokes through there. So, same deal, over, over, under, and into the rim. Under. Don't need to thread them on all the way, but make sure the threads do actually catch. Otherwise the spoke nibbles will fall off as you're installing other spokes. Ah, there goes the spoke nipple. And once again, over, over, under. And if you're doing this right, every spoke should pretty much line up right where it should be with the rim, with a little bit of variation, because some of the spokes aren't going to pop through all the way and release the tension enough to make a perfect alignment, but that's fine. That will all take care of itself as we tighten things up. Kind of like basket weaving, really. And one of the ways you can kind of tell if you've messed up is if it gets more difficult to put each sequential spoke in, then you got the spoke inserted on the wrong hub hole to begin with, and you got to start over. So that means you got to pull all these out or shift them all over like one hole, because usually you're only off by like 1 or 2. Rarely 2. And you can kind of see why I need to leave the spokes loose, is so I can push them out of the way for the other spokes from the opposite side. If these are tightened up too much, then it's going to be really difficult to do that, and you're going to put unnecessary tension on your rim. It's all about keeping it even. Cool. So once you're done, it should look something like that. And one way to check your work also is to go back to your valve stem here. We've got our valve stem right there. The 2 spokes to the side of it should basically almost parallel. Instead of crossing right away, they should basically leave you plenty of room for your valve stem. So now onto the inside ones. These were the outside spokes. And it really doesn't matter if you start with the outside or the inside. You just kind of have to follow the procedure. You know, the only thing that's really critical is that you have, and this is going to depend on how many spokes you have too, but ideally you want these spokes to cross and pull towards each other at the seam. I'm looking for the seam on this particular rim. I'm not finding it. There it is. They did a really good job of grinding it. The seam is right here on this one. You can hardly tell. There's just some grinds in there where they welded it, but it's pretty invisible from the outside. And I can't even see if that's the case right now. It's just going to depend. But more importantly, you want it to have these two spokes parallel-ish. They're not perfect, but... And so the opposite side, we just go through here. And I just shove a bunch of them through there, like 5 to start. Okay. And these ones here, I like to just go ahead and pre-weave them all through first. So once again, over the first two, under the last. Over the first two, under the last. And just repeat that process. And then lock them in with the spoke nipples. So this whole process should take you a couple of hours, maybe an hour if you do it, if you're used to doing it a lot. I think I can build a wheel in maybe an hour, like take the spokes out and build a wheel and have it true maybe in an hour if I'm really hustling, but realistically it takes about 2 hours. And it takes even longer if you're guessing on your spoke size, which sometimes you have to do because you don't always have all the information you need to make a calculated estimate. Insert the last 4 spokes and just do the same old thing. So this is the basket weaving part, and after this we'll have to go through the process of truing the wheel. So now that all of these are here, we have basically like a bunch of loose spokes, but they're all properly installed. So looking back at our seam right here, our seam is right here, and you can see we have got 2 spokes that are pulling, basically pulling that together, so it's not going to have a tendency to separate on us. Not that that really ever happens, but it can and does rarely. So the next process is to throw it up on the truing stand and start that process. It doesn't matter which side you put it on as long as your truing stand is calibrated and centered. But I like to put the drive side on the right. secure it with the skewer. And I mean, you can do this on a bike frame or a fork too, but I really would highly recommend not. Just spend the money and get a truing stand. They're not that expensive. This one's like 150 bucks. So what I do is get the, you can see how far off the rim is here. It's like we've got quite a ways to go. And so naturally, as you might expect, we're going to have to dish the rim to the right towards the drive spindle. So the spokes on the right, on the drive spindle side, are naturally going to be tighter than the left side. And so the way I start this is, again, starting at the valve stem. I'll start with these ones right here because these are the inside spokes right here. So I'll tighten this one and then skip 3 sets and go to the 4th set and do every 4th set. Work my way around just like I was taking the spokes out, and work my way around twice and then do the outside sets of spokes, then skipping every other set. And that'll be the kind of the same pattern that I follow as I do this. So basically at this point, I'm just going to start with the screwdriver, not using the spoke wrench yet, and I'm just going to tighten the spoke nipples till they're bottomed out. Not really putting much tension on them right now at this point, just like making sure that there's no play in them. And it doesn't hurt to give it a little nudge towards where the center of it is either as you're doing that. Just makes the spokes have to work a little bit less hard. So again, at this point, I'm definitely not tightening the spokes. I'm just taking out the play so that they're actually seated on the rim. That's it. We'll go back again and tighten them. I know you're thinking this is a lot of repetition. It's a lot of steps involved, but it is. But once you kind of get the pattern down, it goes pretty fast. So we've already completed the first revolution. And I use the same pattern when I'm just truing a wheel too. If I'm just, adjusting one, I'll go through all the spokes and tighten them in that same procedure. Okay, so we've made it one way through. Now we'll do the outside set here, and we'll just skip every other one. Now some of these might have the spokes starting to poke out before they bottom out completely, and that's okay because we'll make adjustments for that as we start going through and actually like measuring the roundness and lateral play in the rim. Hopefully there's enough battery in this camera to capture all of this, otherwise I'll have to do a second video on how to like true the wheel. So now I've made it almost a full revolution around. All the spokes are bottomed out on the rim. Not necessarily tight, but you don't want to tighten them. You want to kind of just do this in increments. So now we've got them all bottomed out. We're going to grab the spoke tool now and basically repeat the exact same thing we just did, but this time putting more of an emphasis on getting the rim roughly centered here. So I'm going to bring in these jaws just a little bit here, just so I can see a little better. They still need to be dished over to the right quite a bit. So we'll get that. It doesn't need to be precise. Like I said, we're just going to kind of walk our way in there. And you want to just get these guys kind of tight first. You don't want them to be too tight, but like to the point where there's like, you can feel the tension on the spokes. Now they make meters and all kinds of fancy bike wheel building tools for this if you want to spend the money on that kind of precision, but I find that it's not really necessary. And if they don't want to go centered, that's fine. Basically, we're going for a certain tension right now, because essentially we're going to work out the round wobble before we even mess around with any of the lateral stuff. But that starts with like making sure that the spokes are at a certain tension. And as you tighten each side, it might not make a dramatic difference, but as you get a cumulative number of spokes tightened, they will start to pull the wheel in the direction that you want it to. Like, so you see, we're still got a ways to go here. And we just tightened that one and it's still not centered yet, so come back to that later. Okay, so we made it all the way around twice. Ooh. Standing there makes my hip hurt. Leaning that way. So now I'm going to move over to the outside spokes and do the same thing. We'll just get those kind of, get a certain amount of tension on them. Skipping every other set. Kind of biased though, I'm trying to pull the rim to the right, so I am tightening the ones that are on the drive side just a little bit more than the non-drive side. It'll start to have this ring to it as you tension the spokes up. So you can kind of go off that sound a little bit, but I'm sure there are more precise ways to gauge whether or not all the spokes are tight enough. I just kind of go by torque, like how it feels when I'm tightening the spokes. So now that we've got them all pretty much tightened up, we're still like way out. But before we mess around with the lateral part right here, you can kind of see we've got a ways to go. But before we even do that, we're going to check the out of roundness here and see where it's at. So it's off about 1/8 of an inch here. So we're going to stop where it contacts that and tighten the group of spokes around this particular portion of the rim, and then go to the high spot and do the opposite. So tighten. And I'm only tightening on the drive side right now because that's the side that I wanted to pull towards. If anything, I'm going to loosen the non-drive side. Right now I'm more concerned about just tightening this group of spokes around where it touches the rim here, and this is going to pull this section of the rim towards the hub. And then we're going to go to the other side, find the high spot. The high spot's right about here. So this spoke and maybe 5 spokes in each direction. So I'm going to now loosen this side, and I'm going to loosen the non-drive side because, again, I want it to push to the right. And what this is going to do is release tension on the rim and allow it to become a little bit more round. Whoops. And then I'll go back and forth. Find my low spot again, and we're just going to go back and forth until we got it pretty dang round. Back to the high side. So right about here is where our high side is. So we got to loosen these spokes up a little bit. Now this time I'm loosening these a little bit on the drive side, just a bit, because they are too tight. Okay, check our low side again. Right here. It's pretty much going to be around the same spot each time you do this. Give that one a few turns. And these ones a few turns here. High spot is here. Whoops. So each time I do this, I'm getting just a little bit closer. Gotta loosen these ones here because they're really not helping. And I still gotta go to the right quite a bit, so. High spot once again. Now it's getting a little hard to tell. That means I'm getting closer. There's still a high spot right here. And some spokes that are tight. Low spot. Of course, these spokes are feeling pretty darn tight now because I'm getting closer. Still a high spot right about here in this section here. Yeah, I can feel the tension in that spoke. Low spot again. I got 2 low spots. There's the first one. And then the second one's right about here. Now, as you recall, this rim was slightly bent. It wasn't perfect. It was a lot better than the one we took off, though, so. Going for our high spot again, which is right here. Check the low spot again. And then you might have to do this a couple dozen times before you get it perfect, and it just depends on how perfect you want the wheel. Like, if you're riding a rigid bike, you're really going to want this to be pretty good and pretty round, because at high speeds it really starts to vibrate the bike pretty bad if it's out of round. So it seems we've got 2 high spots now, 2 smaller ones. And as you're doing this, you can tell which spokes need to be tightened and loosened. There's just one spot here that just needs a little bit, and this is where the rim is going to need the most spoke tension. So that's pretty good. That's pretty darn close to what we want. I mean, very, very little difference. So I'm going to call that close enough. So now I'm going to bring these lateral arms in and get it centered while keeping this on here too, so I can just kind of keep an eye on the roundness of it as I make adjustments. And I'm going to bring this in, and it is still pretty bad. So we're just going to walk it in. It's touching on the left side right here, so that's where it's out the furthest. So I'm going to start here and just work it in by tightening and loosening evenly. So I'll loosen the side and then tighten the other side equally to get a good pull on it. And basically trying not to turn any spoke more than like a full revolution before moving on to a different one. And generally speaking, it's better to loosen a spoke and then tighten a spoke, and then loosen a spoke and then tighten a spoke. Otherwise, you're just adding too much tension to the wheel. So now it's not touching, so I'm going to bring the arms in a little bit further until it hits again, and then do that same process again. Okay. Bring the arms in a little further until it hits. This time it's hitting on the right side, so I've gone too far to the right now. Getting closer. So you just kind of work these two arms in towards the rim until it's perfectly centered. Touching right here. And I can feel a couple of loose spokes on the left side that need tightened. Okay. Now we got one spot here. And at this point you need to make very small adjustments because we're pretty close. Like there's only about a 1/16 of an inch of clearance between the two arms, the centering arms, and the rim. So only minute changes are needed. Even let's see, that was too much. But it's still out because I can see it. So I'm going to come in a little bit more. And at this point, we'll kind of revisit the height gauge here and make any corrections that we need, because I've got it pretty well centered laterally now, but we did kind of screw up there out of roundness. It's a little bit low right here, so I'm just going to tighten these guys up a little bit, being careful not to go. Still got a little bit going on right there. Sometimes it's hard to tell what side it's hitting as you get really close. And then when you think you're good, you can just pull this arm away and just give it a good spin, look at it. I mean, it's definitely not perfect. I could get it better than this. So once again, back to the drawing board here. It has a little bit of a wobble to it. So there's a high spot here. And there's an exceptionally tight spoke right there and here. And then another low spot here. Just got to really dial these parts in. Another low spot. Still low right here too. And those spokes are rather tight, so I am dealing with a little bit of a bent rim here, and that's making getting it perfect a little more difficult. that already looks a little bit better than it was a minute ago. Let's deal with that low spot. You just got to keep working these low spots until you get them all. So I did a low spot last time. Let's find my high spot here. It's a high spot right here. And a low spot right here. You're getting close though. Still got a high spot. Gotta work. Just gotta kind of iron all this stuff out. It can take some time, especially when you're using a used rim, but it can even happen on new rims because rims aren't always made perfectly. Looks like just the rest of it just needs to come down a tiny bit. Almost all of these spokes are too tight. Definitely takes some patience. Now this would have been practically impossible with the other rim. Like the spokes were already way too tight to the point where they were like stripping off the tool. But I think this is good. I'm gonna live with that. I mean, it could still get better if I wanted to be crazy precise about it, but that's how you fix the wheel right there.